President Trump's first full month as commander-in-chief is wrapping up, and the president has been moving at breakneck speed with a variety of executive orders and actions. Trump celebrated his accomplishments at CPAC, taking a victory lap, lauding his immigration efforts, and moves to shrink the size of the federal government. To break down how Americans are feeling about all this and more, we're going on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science at Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. President Trump is capping off February with a 52% approval rating, according to a Harvard Harris survey. That's good news for Trump, who was hovering in the low 40s this time during his first term. Despite that, another survey by Reuters Ipsos found that just 1 in 3 approve of the job Trump is doing to curb inflation. The economy and cost of living remain top of mind for a majority of Americans. Do you see high prices cutting into Trump's overall approval rating in the coming months?
Yeah, look, if those prices are high, and that was, the economy, inflation was the number one issue that his voters said, and to be honest, a lot of majority of voters, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, if those prices don't come down, I expect to see it in his approval rating. But what we're seeing right now is he's a little over 30 days into his term. We're clearly in the honeymoon phase. There are other aspects of his policy that voters like, like what he's doing on the border. There's mixed opinions on DOGE, but if by summer we still see some high prices and not the economy still struggling for middle and lower class Americans, I could see that his approval rating taking a hit.
Last night, the House passed a framework for Trump's agenda, but it includes some big cuts that would likely affect entitlement programs like Medicaid, which can be an unpopular move. According to a poll from Hart Research, 71% of Trump voters said cutting Medicaid would be unacceptable. About 60% said the same of cuts to food and nutrition programs like SNAP. Republicans are already holding on to a slim majority in the House. How much is this bill going to define the midterm races?
I think it's going to be one of the biggest defining moments if they pass it, and they pass it with some of those cuts that they talk about. I think it's given how last night's vote went, it'll be interesting to see if we actually do get something of that magnitude, where we're cutting the deficit the way some of the deficit hawk wants, but also not cut into Medicaid, which is one of our biggest cost drivers. I think it remains a question whether we're going to see those things, but I think the members know, the president knows, and the voters have made it clear they don't want Medicaid cut. So we'll see what happens when that meets some of the deficit hawks who want to reduce the spending.
And it's interesting that Harvard-Harris poll showed most people like the idea of a government efficiency agency. 72% of voters, including 60% of Democrats, support the idea. But that Reuters poll showed that more than half of Americans, 58%, are worried that DOGE could hurt services like Social Security and student loan services in their specific area. And 70% said wealthy people like Elon Musk have too much influence over the White House. It seems like people like the policy, but maybe not how it's being implemented. Do you see any of this having an impact on how DOGE operates and how much control Musk has over that department?
Yeah, it's interesting. On face of it, when you describe it, everyone wants less government waste and it to be more efficient. But as you pointed out, there's aspects of how it's being run and who's running it the public's not so sure of. I don't think any of these polls or any of this feedback affects Elon Musk personally. I think when it starts affecting, President Trump's approval, or if we get far enough along closer to the midterm, some of these members' chances of reelection, I think that's when you'll see some potential changes to how DOGE operates. But right now, look, people like the policy. They're not sure how the execution works out. If it's still like this over the next few months, I could see it affecting Trump's approval rating.
And in the middle of this massive push from Trump and Republicans to slash the federal government, Virginia is gearing up to elect a new governor this year. One potential factor that could impact the outcome of that election could be DOGE and its massive layoffs of the federal workforce. Virginia is home to some 145,000 federal workers. Most are concentrated in Northern Virginia near Washington, D.C. The state is also home to a large number of military members and defense contractors. How much impact do you see the layoffs and cuts having on that election later this year?
Well, I think it'll be a major factor in the gubernatorial race and potentially even the Republican primary. I mean, Governor Youngkin's already come out, made several statements, try to do some websites, try to do some programs. Federal workers in Northern Virginia are pretty prevalent, and Northern Virginia is really where the governorship is won or lost, um, uh, based on those suburbs and how populous they are. I think some of these cuts are permanent. I think some of these cuts are going to be even bigger, and so it is going to play a major factor in this upcoming election.
Staying in VA, a Roanoke College survey looked at how the candidates for governor are faring. According to the poll, former Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger is holding off the Republican frontrunner, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earle-Sears, by double digits. 39% said they'd vote for Spanberger compared to 24% who said they'd vote for Earle-Sears. Some 4% said they would vote for someone else. Scott, this seems like a pretty heavy swing to Democrats in Virginia. What do you think is behind it, and how can Republicans win back some of those voters?
Well, I think since neither candidate hit 50, I think what we're seeing is some voter candidate ID issues here. Abigail Spanberger, former representative, fairly public and out there. Earle-Sears obviously has a profile as well. But I expect those numbers to tighten. If Abigail Spanberger starts getting high 40s, low 50s, that's when I would say this race, it looks solidly in their favor, but it's way too early. Not enough people know who the candidates are. I think we're looking at a poll just off candidate ID. Let's see what happens, as we get more into campaign season, if those Winsome Sear numbers stay the same.
And looking ahead a little more to midterm races, Trump endorsed this week Republican Representative Byron Donalds for governor of Florida. Meantime, Republican incumbent Ron DeSantis is floating his wife, Casey, for the job. Do you expect this to be another influence battle in the Sunshine State between DeSantis and Trump?
It sure looks like that. Every Florida gubernatorial race is pretty nuts, and that endorsement of Byron Donalds was probably one of President Trump's strongest over the years. And I think that's directly because there's a rivalry between Governor DeSantis and Donald Trump. We'll see what this one. There's still Matt Gaetz being floated out there. There's a bunch of different members who are thinking about running. Florida usually gets some random billionaire who decides to throw their hat in. I think there's a long way to go, but yeah, you can see the tension between the DeSantis and Trump camps on this one.
And Vivek Ramaswamy has declared this week for the Ohio governor's race. He has a lot of money and Trump's backing. Who else are you watching for in that race?
Yeah, no, everyone's trying to see what former Senator Sherrod Brown's going to do. Is he gonna try and come back at some level in Ohio and Ohio politics? I don't know if it's governor or potentially senator. But the Democrats don't have quite the bench in Ohio as they used to over the last 10 or 15 years. Vivek is certainly a candidate who can raise the money, give the money, has a national profile, has actually pretty strong roots in Ohio as well. So it'll be interesting to see who the Democrats put up. I think Vivek's probably a pretty good candidate for the Republicans going forward too. So I don't see him having a huge problem in the primary either.
Be interesting to see if Tim Ryan, former congressman and Senate candidate, is another Democrat that talks about getting into that race. I want to look ahead even further to 2028. A straw poll taken at CPAC last week seems to place Vice President J.D. Vance as Trump's heir apparent in the Republican Party. It's a shift from earlier this year when names like Donald Trump Jr. were being floated, and Trump himself has actually joked about a third term. Is this a sign that Republicans are ready to move on from Trump himself, or does the CPAC straw this early not really matter that much?
It doesn't really matter. I mean, look, Steve Bannon got in the top 3 in the straw poll, and I don't think anyone takes him very seriously. The straw poll's fun; it gets news. We're 2 years out before political nerds like us start talking about the presidential election, and we're about 3.5 years out before any of the general public starts taking any of that kind of seriously. So I would put that CPAC poll. It's a fun thing to talk about, but I wouldn't take it very seriously at all.
All right, that's all I have for you, Scott Tranter. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for What's America Thinking? I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel.